Good afternoon. I'm Margaret Bell from Volunteering Australia. It's delightful to be in Tasmania this week. It's a bit hard to concentrate on the work I'm here for though, because it's such a beautiful state. I have enjoyed a visit to Launceston and now I'm in Hobart, and really it's so beautiful and so relaxing that I'm very reluctant to leave, but leave I must. Can I leave with you a few ideas that you might find as exciting as I do? In Australia next year, we're going to be hosting the 23rd World Conference on Volunteering. This is a conference that's developed by the International Association for Volunteer Effort. IAVE, we call it. IAVE celebrated its 40th birthday 2 years ago, so we're getting to be quite middle-aged now. But our thinking's very modern and very new. One of the highlights of the work that IAVE does worldwide is to celebrate and promote volunteering all over the world. It's a wonderful thrill to be part of that and to be able to say congratulations to the many millions of men and women who make a difference in the communities that they're part of. We're going to be celebrating in a special way next year with the IAVE conference in Australia. This is the second time we've hosted the conference in Australia. We had a conference, this particular one, 26 years ago, a long time ago, and we welcomed 30 countries and 300 people, and we talked about volunteering as being a fresh option. Next year, in September, when we hope to welcome many Tasmanians to the World Conference, we're going to be looking at a different theme altogether. We're going to be examining volunteering as today's imperative. Those of you who, like me, are concerned for the future, for this planet, for our children and for our children's children, will know that unless we have communities that know how to care for one another, and communities that really want to work for the common good, we're going to have anarchy all over the world. I'm very optimistic about the future, not sad and pessimistic, because I believe, as many do who work in and with IAVE, that volunteering is the imperative that's really going to change the world. We want to put this imperative on the map next year, and we want to put Australia on the map with it. I hope that you will join us, because we're going to be looking at some wonderful themes. Firstly, we're going to be looking at capacity building. What's that? Building communities, our local communities, and this is something that Tasmanians are very good at, particularly those of you who live in regional and rural environments, where you know one another and you know how important it is to work with and for each other. I believe that Tasmania could showcase just what volunteering in the local community is all about. There are other areas of interest from Tasmania that would be of worldwide significance. Volunteering in the wilderness, for instance. Everyone's interested in the beauty of Tasmania, and particularly in its natural habitat. We really want to welcome people to think about capacity building as something about building the common good for my family, for my workplace, for the local place where I live, in fact for any community that I'm part of. Secondly, we're going to be looking at employee volunteering. Are you employed at the moment? Do you work for a bank, a finance company, a shop, a farm? Where do you work and what do you do? And does your employer encourage you to give a few hours to volunteer work? If not, have a chat to them and say, look, do you think you could support me to do some work for my favourite local non-government organisation? You all belong, I'm sure, to tuck shops, to sporting fields, to school libraries, to some organisation or space in your local community that you'd like to give a few hours more to if only you had the time. How about asking your employer if they'd think of releasing you for a few hours every year to give a little more time where you're needed most and where they could be acknowledged for giving that time and that space. We're going to be looking at employee volunteering like this, and we're going to be looking at what corporations are doing all over the world to encourage business people to participate more keenly in the communities that they're part of. Here's an exciting one, something that could be really important to Tasmania. We're going to look at Indigenous volunteering. What's that? Aboriginal Australians have been volunteering for thousands of years, volunteering in a model that we call a reciprocal model. Something in it for you, something in it for me. The reciprocal model of volunteering, for many of us at IAVE, is seen not only as a way of the past, but also as a really important way for the future. And we're going to be asking Aboriginal Australians to show us that way. Why has it worked so well in communities from one end of Australia to the other? We're going to be talking with other Indigenous groups too, with Maori people, with people, the Dayats from India, people from Latin America and from Europe. It's going to be extremely interesting to hear how different Indigenous groups have examined and worked well with the act of volunteering. What else are we going to be talking about? Well, we all hear about philanthropy, and there's a discussion around whether or not Australians are generous in philanthropy or not. There are many foundations, trusts and organisations that support, the corporate foundations too, that support philanthropy in volunteering. We want to acknowledge the volunteer effort that goes into making philanthropic decisions. It's very interesting to know that organisations that give millions of dollars a year to support the non-government organisations are very often supported in themselves by large numbers of volunteers. We're going to look at this from a global perspective and see what happens in the United States, what happens in Germany, what happens in Japan, what happens in Korea or China in the whole area of philanthropy. Why don't you come along and see what you can learn about philanthropy and the future? Finally, we're going to be looking at policies and practices in volunteering from around the world. What kind of policies and practices make volunteering work well? For many of you who are working in volunteer organisations, you will immediately be saying, well, if I had some insurance and I was able to carry out the work that I do, knowing that if I'm injured, I'm supported by an insurance scheme, then that might be something I'm looking to. It might also be that I'm looking to be recognised for not necessarily individually, but to have recognised the kind of volunteer effort that goes on in my local community. How can that be put together in a policy format so that it's understood well? What about the hours that I should work as a volunteer? And what about the act of volunteering? What is it really? And when can I be called a volunteer? And when can I be called someone who's just doing a few jobs in the community? What's informal volunteering? What does that look like? And what's formal volunteering? And am I a volunteer if I work in sport? Am I a volunteer if I work at the local library or the local hospital? Am I a volunteer if I bring the neighbour's washing in? Let's have a look and see what policy and practices tell us about volunteering. We're coming close now to National Volunteer Week, so that's a moment in Australia for us to think with pride and appreciation of the volunteer work that happens here. Not only should we be proud of what we do in this country because it's plentiful, but we have an opportunity to proudly host people from all over the world to come to Australia to see us showcasing volunteering and to see us also learning about volunteering and its practices from many, many countries in the world. We'll make friends that will endure forever. We'll get renewed enthusiasm for the kind of work that we too can do in the future. Let me close with telling you something about why I'm still volunteering. One day I was at a volunteer conference in Washington many, many years ago, and I was standing in a breakfast queue next to a lady from South Africa. I asked her, just by way of conversation, "What do you do in your volunteer work?" And she said, "I feed 6,000 people a day." I thought, can't be right. There's no way anybody feeds 6,000 people a day. So I politely said, "I beg your pardon, what did you say you did?" And she said again, "I feed 6,000 people a day." I was very taken aback. And I said to her, "What on earth are you doing in a breakfast queue at a conference talking about volunteering when you do something as important as feeding 6,000 people a day?" She looked at me as if to say, "There's one of these born every minute." And she looked a bit sympathetic about the whole thing. And then she said, "Don't you know why I'm here?" And I said, "No, but I'd like to." And her response was, "I come here to get the courage to go away and do this for another 2 years." So I'm inviting you to come to the Gold Coast in September next year, between the 15th and the 20th of September, to get the courage to go away and do it again for another 2 years. Thank you.